Okay, well, I'm back with a new book. I won't make any pretensions to being particularly objective in my choice of books. Basically, they're books that I'm interested in as I try to think about what's going on in our world today. And this is one that I was introduced to back when I was in grad school, and it left a lasting impression on me, but I hadn't gone back to it or the author since. But now I'm returning to it, and I'm realizing how big of an impact this one book had on the way I think. The author's name is Jacques Ellul, and the book is The Technological Society. It was actually published first in French in 1954 under the title Technique, the Wager of the Century. And then it was translated into English, and they changed the title to The Technological Society for the English translation in 1964. And I read this sometime in the late 80s, early 90s, sometime in there. And like I said, it left a lasting impression on me. So what I wanted to do today, in just maybe 15 or 20 minutes, is talk about who Ellul was, and just a little bit about his ideas generally, and then we can plunge into the book next time. And I'll, like last time, I'll just go chapter by chapter through this book and pull out some of the key points that I think need to be known by people. I went to a couple of different sources, actually 3 sources, to get some biographical information about Ellul. And one came from an editorial by William Vanderburg from the Bulletin of Science, Technology, and Society. Vanderburg is an engineer who was deeply affected by Ellul's ideas. I also went to the International Jacques Ellul Society website because I figured I could get some pretty accurate information there. And then, of course, I also went to Wikipedia. And I found that there was quite a bit of overlap amongst this information, but I'm just going to pick out some of the highlights again here. You know the phrase, think globally, act locally? That was coined by Jacques Ellul. I didn't know that. I mean, that's a phrase almost everybody in America probably knows. But they don't know where it came from. Jacques Ellul was a great scholar and philosopher, but he was also somebody who did act locally, and I'll cover that a bit. He was born in Bordeaux, France in 1912, and he died on May 19th, 1994. And he came from a poor family, or at least not a family that was very well-to-do. According to the website, the Ellul Society website, his mother taught art in a private school, and his father found himself unemployed on several occasions because of his uncompromising personality that placed honor above all considerations. So Ellul's childhood, it said, was poor but happy. He was brought up to be committed to aristocratic virtues. That means non-bourgeois virtues. Bourgeois virtues kind of uphold practical business, so they include things like, thrift and honesty and hard work. And I don't think Ellul was against any of those, but they are contrasted with the aristocratic virtues such as courage, honor, piety, faith, those kinds of things. So from the aristocratic virtue perspective, the so-called bourgeois virtues are a little bit lower on the ladder. So you can kind of get a feel already for the type of person Ellul was. He went to a public school, but he was able to study Latin, French, German, and history, and he obtained his high school diploma at the age of 17. And he wanted to be a naval officer, but luckily, Ellul's father did something many fathers and mothers used to do, which is more or less insist that that was not his aptitude, and made him study law. And unlike now, where you can't make your kid over 17 do anything, apparently they could make Ellul study law. So thank God for that, because 1,000 or so articles and I don't know how many books, 50 books maybe later, we have this incredible heritage because his dad was very demanding, apparently. So, of note, in 1930, Ellul claims to have had an experience. The Ellul Society website says it was a vision, but the Wikipedia article says something probably sounds maybe a little bit more detailed account. Basically says that he felt like he had a very strong feeling of the presence of God. And after feeling this presence, when he had been translating Faust, Goethe's great work, Faust, he had this experience, and this began a rather precipitous conversion to Christianity. Ellul was, by denomination, a Reformed Christian, which is a type of Protestant. Okay, so he had a very good friend, Charbonneau, and they together pioneered this social philosophy of personalism, or at least it says elaborated the personalism social philosophy. And they then went on to become true pioneers, the website says, of political ecology, and they carried out a libertarian, anarchist-inspired critique of modern society. And so the two of them began Ellul's anarchism. I know this sounds like this is a theme for me because I just did Chris Hedges' book, The Death of the Liberal Class, and Hedges is an anarchist too. But actually, when I read the Technological Society the first time, and even now I'm going through it the second time, I'm not seeing like a lot of anarchism in there. So I didn't realize going into this that that was the category Ellul was in as well. But he's actually sometimes categorized in the same way Hedges is, as a Christian anarchist of sorts. So I just find that interesting, that I seem to have been gravitating towards anarchism, but it may just be an accident. He got his PhD in 1936 with a thesis title, History and Legal Nature of the Mancipium, which is the Roman freedmen, I think, would be how you would translate that. They were kind of like the lower class, free but yet not free people. So in 1940, of course, France, the area of France that he lived in was under the pro-Nazi Vichy government. And so, though he did have a job teaching at a law school, he was dismissed, or, well, he taught law school, finally, at Montpellier. And he was dismissed in 1940 because of his father's status as a foreigner. He was not a Frenchman, he was of British and Austrian citizenship. Then Ellul went to live in the Entre-deux-Mers area between Garonne and Dordogne rivers. And there in the little village of Marthe, he became active in the resistance, the French resistance against the Vichy government, and took up agriculture in order to feed his family. And it says here, he later confessed that he was just as proud of harvesting his first ton of potatoes as he was of receiving his qualifying exam scores in Roman law in 1943. Well, I guess that's when he said it. Yes, I guess that's right. So after the war, he was briefly a member of the Bordeaux city administration, but he disliked it, apparently, and even though he got dragged into also being a candidate, sort of like post-resistance, he did not win, apparently, and did not want to be in the government. Must have had a bad experience there. He came to conclude that really the best type of political action was maybe more like social action, because the government was not the most effective, or let's put it this way, a public official could not have that much effect on the motions of government since it was highly bureaucratic. You can begin to see, even in his pull away from direct politics, this notion that there's something big out there that the individual will have a hard time moving or controlling in any way. So his legacy, according to the Ellul Society, 1,000 articles and 50 or so books translated into more than 12 languages, and the Technological Society was a book that was discovered and promoted in America by Aldous Huxley, the English author of A Brave New World, and brought him fame in American universities, right? Okay. So not until then, and I guess because of Huxley's sort of taking note of him, did American universities begin to have students read the Technological Society. Ellul also wrote a lot of popular works, and in fact many of his books were well written enough to qualify as popular books, even though they're also scholarly books. And I'll read you a few of the titles, because, I mean, this man had a great knack for titles. The Presence of the Kingdom. These, I'll just read you the ones in English. The Judgment of Jonah, Money and Power, False Presence of the Kingdom, To Will and to Do an Ethical Research for Christians, The Political Illusion, The Critique of New Commonplaces. Well, you get the idea. This, titles are pretty important. They got to say what you're talking about and say it very succinctly in his due. And that he was well read and continues to be read by a number of people even now, although it does note in the Wikipedia, or maybe, no, it was in this other article by the engineer, not nearly as well known as he should be. So, I mean, among the things in Ellul's life that are of note, I just want to point this thing out again here. It says, Ellul participated in an underground network that provided assistance to Jews persecuted by the Nazis during the raids on Jews organized by the French police at the instigation of the Gestapo. This network obtained access to the list of those whom the police were planning to arrest the following day. They went to warn them personally, urged them to go into hiding, provided false papers, and directed them to Protestant families who would receive them primarily in Poitou or in the direction of the Pyrenees. Along with several of these friends, Ellul was posthumously given the title Righteous Among the Nations. That's a big deal. He later in life was a volunteer with youth concerning, prevention of juvenile delinquency. He was very dedicated to that for almost 20 years, engaging young people directly to try to help them straighten out their lives. And he was into the ecology movement as well, and particularly trying to save the French Aquitaine coastline from too much pollution related to growing commerce in the region. Now, I wanted to spend a little bit of time with this article by this engineer, because I found this interesting, because it has to do with academia where I'm at, and I certainly recognize these trends. So this guy says that Ellul's writings really had a major impact on his life, because he realized when he was going to, in graduate school in engineering, that his field, and in fact all fields in the universities, had become very much self-contained, and the disciplines were very, very discrete, like silos, as we might put it in the universities, not really talking to each other and not really seeing the bigger picture. In his mind, once he read the Technological Society, he realized that the organization of universities had become based upon what Jacques Ellul called technique, and that technique is a it had created this specialization of these fields to the point where there was very little ability to take a step back and, as Ellul would say, think globally, in the sense of thinking beyond this discrete discipline. So I'll just read a little bit of this to you. This is from The Life and Work of Jacques Ellul by Willem Vanderberg, Bulletin of Science, Technology, and Society. He says, first, implicit in Ellul's accounts was a perfectly accurate description of how my mindset worked. I had never read anything like it. If this person understood my mindset, even though he was not an engineer, he might be able to help me understand how this mindset was a part of the problem and hopefully how it could become part of the solution. The second intuition was more disturbing. Although I was regarded as pushing the frontier and thinking about these deeper issues, I was clearly part of the problem, with the result that I would have to do a great deal more work to become part of the solution. And a little bit later, he says, the technical approach to knowing and doing had become the dominant alternative to their symbolic counterparts based on experience and culture. As a consequence of this desymbolization, our existence as a symbolic species was undergoing a mutation. Our traditional symbolic approaches to knowing and doing placed each and every experience in the context of all others, and hence a person's life, and via this life in the common historical journey of his or her community. Culture has always been the symbolic means that sustains individual and collective human life to make sense of and live in an ultimately unknowable world. Technique, on the other hand, relies on making use of a very different and minimal context by placing each instance of a category of phenomenon directly in the context of all instances of this category, thus proceeding to make sense of and live in the world of one category of these phenomenon at a time. It is an approach that allows for the greatest possible efficiency by slicing through the fabric of human lives, societies, and the biosphere. This explains why our civilization succeeds spectacularly in terms of improving the performance of everything and fails equally spectacularly in ensuring that the results are able to co-evolve without undermining the integrality and integrity of the fabric of relations in which it participates. Well, I think that really sums up Ellul's contribution as it might apply to a discipline like engineering pretty well. Let me try to unpack that a bit. He's saying that, that culture as a whole has this ability through the manipulation of symbols that people share, a way to communicate about the common good, about what's good for people. But in the quest for efficiency, we have more and more created so much specialization that as we continue down that road, we focus so completely on the development and perfecting of particular things. For instance, the better and better engine, car engine, or whatever it may be, the better and better airplane engines, that we don't think about how the car engine or airplane engine or the surrounding technology fits into people's lives, what it does both positively and negatively for other human and cultural values. We only focus on how to make it better and better. I suppose now we might say the self-driving car might be a pretty good example of this. And engineers are really hell-bent on trying to figure out how to make a self-driving car, which sounds really exciting and everything and also scary, but we don't have them also thinking about, nor do I think anybody's thinking about it enough, how this will change people's lives. Not just the dangers that might be involved, because probably the safety might increase, actually, if they did it really, really well. But even if it did lead to more safety on the road, let's say that might happen, in what other ways could this be harmful? Or and not even that, just in what other ways will it affect people's behavior? And is it something that we really want? Okay, I know that may sound funny because if it would increase safety, why wouldn't we want it? But if we go into autopilot in our cars, do we experience less freedom? I mean, especially in America, the automobile is the symbol of freedom. I know that we abuse it, we probably create too much pollution, but in the American mind, being able to get in your car and go where you want to go is a huge symbol of freedom. And we're talking about basically creating a system in which people don't get to experience that feeling anymore. You know, I don't know. There's so many things ethicists would have to think about. People involved in culture, would need to think about. Patterns of behavior will change. Mentality will change. And we don't think about those things as we're developing the technology. We develop the technology because we can. And this is what this author is saying, that the field of engineering, as he experienced it, had very few engineers even capable of thinking about the larger impact of their inventions and their perfecting of technology. Just a couple of more quotes from this article. He says, in sum, Jacques Ellul implicitly described how discipline-based approaches to knowing and doing were pushing back their symbolic counterparts based on experience and culture without being able to replace the latter. As a result, it has become impossible to know where we are taking science and technology and where these powerful creations are taking us through their vast influence of ourselves and our world. The public university no longer has any concept of a public good other than by performance criteria. Its professions have no idea how they are affecting human life and the world. And they don't see that as their job, I would add. And then he says, as a result, we make one blunder after another. The situation is becoming increasingly bizarre as the public university becomes a technical university dedicated to the cult of efficiency and little else. Well, I can attest to that. And I think that it's a huge mistake. I agree with this author, and I agree with Jacques Ellul, and many advocates of the humanities who think that we're losing a great deal by turning our universities into technical universities with the, quote, cult of efficiency and little else, because we'll lose leaders. We've got to have people who can think globally. We have to have people who can think about the impact of what we do. And that's where the humanities can be extremely helpful. So anyway, that's a brief introduction to Ellul and some of the reasons, not all, but just a few of the reasons why his work is really important for people to know, even if you're not into anarchism, which this book isn't going to get into a whole lot, at least I don't remember that. And even if you're not a Christian, because again, the Christian perspective kind of lurks in the background in this book, but the main value of the book really is just the exposition of the technological society or technique. So when we come back, we'll have to figure out a little bit more what he means by technique, because it includes technology, but it's greater than technology. So I hope you stick with me on this one, and thank you for listening. Bye.